Hey everybody, Jane here, and it is time for my February 2021 wrap-up. February was kind of a meh month of reading. I read 4 books, and I didn't love any of them. 3 of them were 3-star reads, and 1 of them was a 4-star read. So, kind of an okay month, nothing absolutely wonderful, but they weren't terrible either. So let's get into the books I read. So the first book I read this month was Arsenic and Old Books. And I am going to do a very detailed review on this book shortly. I assume that'll probably be coming out next month because I have already recorded it, but I'm about a month behind in uploads. So this book is about an archivist and his cat. The archivist has been given a diary from the Civil War that the mayor believes will help her son in the upcoming election. And he is to authenticate it, and there's a little bit of a mystery surrounding the journals. And ultimately, the journals are stolen. There's a murder of people who were interested in the books, and it's an interesting read. This book was a really tough one for me. I had almost DNF'd it around the 2nd or 3rd chapter because I was really just not feeling it. I felt like there was a lot of info dumping about characters. This is not the first book in the series, and I felt like the author was trying to catch me up on who these characters are, and they weren't important enough in that moment for me to care who they were. I also didn't like some of the side characters who would come in. Particularly, there's a feminist teacher who is interested, a women's studies teacher, I guess is what they're called, who's interested in these diaries, and she's not very nice. She's kind of annoying, and I wasn't feeling the book. Then I got into it, and I really loved it, and there were parts where I thought, okay, this is going to be a 4-star. I'm really having a good time. We get to see some of what's in the diary, but it's not too much, and that's kind of something I have a lot of challenges with, is getting that, even spacing of real time, book time, journal, regular story, but this did beautifully with that. I love the cat. He's a Maine Coon, and his relationship with his owner is awesome. And there was a lot of good things about this. And then we got to the end, and I really hated the ending. But obviously I don't want to spoil too much, so all I will say is there were tropes I was expecting, because this is a cozy mystery, that I didn't get. And the way the mystery kind of was revealed didn't work for me. And then the resolution didn't really work for me either. So that kind of dropped this back down from what would have been possibly a 4 to a 3. So I was kind of all over the place with this book. If you like this series, this book is probably good for you, because I assume, but I'm not sure, the author does similar endings in other books. I don't really know, but it seemed like they weren't following the tropes I'm used to. So I don't know. I can't say don't read it because I enjoyed my time with it, but I was really mad at the ending. Really, really mad. Bad, bad, bad ending for me. It didn't do what I wanted it to do. So yeah, that was the first book of the month. The second book of the month is a sequel, and it is a manga, and that is Silent Voice. This is about a guy who was teasing a girl who was deaf when they were younger, and he's kind of trying to make amends with her now and become friends. You get the impression he has a little bit of a crush on her. It was fine. Manga is hard for me because, especially when it's not in color, and this one is not, it's in black and white, I sometimes have some challenges really being sure who the different characters are. There were also some cultural things in here that I think I didn't understand because they were cultural, and I don't read a lot of manga. So, for instance, my understanding is that in the Japanese culture, family members frequently bathe together, and that is obviously not something we do in America very typically. So there was some things in here that I just wasn't real sure about. So it wasn't a bad book, and it probably was just me in this case. Manga, again, I've read a couple I really, really love, but it's something that is kind of tricky for me, and especially when it's in black and white. And I don't plan to continue the series. It was fine, but this just isn't for me, I don't think. The last two that I read this month were nonfiction, and I do think that's part of the reason that my reading month went kind of slow. I love nonfiction, but it just takes me a long time to read them. And I'll be really honest, this first nonfiction, I don't even know how to pronounce the name. Shadenfreude? Anyway, this is kind of like, this is the feeling of joy you get when somebody else suffers but rightly. So there's like a lot of examples in this book, and I'll give you some. When a casino magnate put his elbow through a 48.4 million painting by Picasso that he was just about to sell. When you discover your ex's off again and on again fiance is marrying somebody else. Horse yoga, in which people do yoga on top of horses, and when it goes wrong. Those are times you might experience this sensation. And I think this book, it is Schadenfreude, The Joy of Another's Misfortune is what it's titled. And I think I wanted something different than the book gave. I really was hoping to get insight into the psychology of why we feel this way. And while that is touched on, I didn't feel like that was the majority of this book. A lot of this book is exploring what this is, the circumstances you would feel it in. As you saw, I opened to a page and it didn't take long for me to find a whole list of examples. There's a lot of examples. I think each chapter starts with like 3. Some of them are very funny, but it didn't really do what I wanted, which was the psychology of why we feel that way. This is more like, we feel this way, and there was a little bit of psychology in there, like one thing in particular that it did talk about that I liked is siblings and sibling rivalry, and why you feel like kind of haughty maybe when your siblings have a downfall. Your sibling does something and, now mom and dad don't look at them quite the same, and you're like, yeah. And one of the things it kind of talked about was, evolution-wise, often there were families that had too many kids, not enough resources. So if your parents like you a little better, if you're a little higher up on that food chain, you're probably going to survive and get the resources. So there was some stuff like that, but overall I just wanted more of that, and I didn't get it in this book. So it wasn't bad. It was a quick read, not very long. It was interesting. There was a little bit of discussion about how this concept was used in the rise of feminism and for women's rights and stuff, and that was actually really cool. But again, this book just wasn't quite there. I ended up giving it a 3. So the first 3 that I've mentioned have been 3s, so all my 3 stars at the beginning of the month. The last book I read in February was my 4-star. And I really enjoyed it. It wasn't one I necessarily had planned on picking up. It was kind of a happy accident. It is a newer book, and I had seen another YouTuber unbox it, and it looked really cool. And that is A Most Peculiar Book, The Inherent Strangeness of the Bible. And this book talks a lot about the inconsistencies in the Bible and what we should make of them. This writer is a believer, and they very much love the Bible despite the complex, often confusing things in the Bible. I think that this book could be read by a believer or a non-believer, and they would be equally okay with it because it is written by a believer. She's a little more forgiving of some things than maybe I am, as somebody who is not necessarily a believer at this time in my life. As some of you know who follow my channel, I've been having a lot of struggles with my ideas about religion and trying to understand really what faith is and what it has to offer me. The basic premise of this book is that the Bible was written by a lot of people over a long period of time, and then it was edited by a lot of people over a long period of time, each with their own agendas, and that's why we have the complexities of this book. I was really hoping almost for more of an apologist type viewpoint where it's like, well, this is probably here because, this is probably here because of this cultural thing. And the author does that a little. They do, like, there's places where they say, okay, this is where how it's usually translated, but this word here can be translated this way, this way, this way. This person is obviously very educated, very much a Bible scholar, very much loves the Bible. And there were, again, times too where it was like, okay, historically, but I wanted a lot more of that than I got. So like the last book, it was a lot more my expectations than anything the book did wrong. This book was quite readable, so I can give it that. It's very readable, and I really enjoyed overall it. Again, I would have liked more explanation for, hey, I think this is why these things are contradictory, or this or that, other than just a lot of people read it, a lot of people wrote it, a lot of people edited it, and that caused problems. This isn't a perfect book. It's not a history book. But her point of view, the author's point of view, is that we should still be able to take the truths from this book, despite its imperfections, despite the things that are not correct and that are our problems, or that, you know, the stories don't quite make a lot of sense, or, you know, we're missing some kind of historical context to make the story even a parable we can understand. And while I like that, it's a little hard for me, again, as somebody who grew up super religious, to be like, okay, so I'm supposed to look at this book as something that is not historical, is not literally true, but has truth, and what is that truth? And I'm just not sure, for my own spiritual beliefs, how I want to, or if I want to incorporate the Bible, especially without really understanding why it is how it is, other than lots of writers, lots of editors, lots of different agendas. So while I really enjoyed this book, while I definitely recommend it to both believers and non-believers, because again, it's written by a believer, so I don't think you're going to be offended by it unless you are one of those people who this has to be like, the Bible is a history book. If you believe the Bible is a history book, yeah, don't bother with this one. But if you believe that the Bible is a good, wonderful, inspirational book with some historic problems, some issues within the writing, some places where, you know, it says one thing, then it says another, and it's not congruent, you know, but you can still see it as parable for the truth. Teachings that we can subscribe to in our modern day. Things that were inspirational to the people at the time that it was written and can be inspirational to us in a different way. You know, there are a lot of good points that she makes, especially about how the Bible has influenced literature, and how even things like, you know, David and Goliath, that you know, the underdog beating this terrible giant is such an important part of our literature and our ideas, and how important the Bible is in our history. So a very literary, I would say this is almost a literary approach to the Bible with some truth-seeking involved. So if you can handle that, this was an interesting book. Again, I felt maybe the author was a little bit too, like, find the truth in it. Well, you've just said that it's written by people, that it was written by people with different agendas, so I'm not really sure necessarily what truths we're supposed to seek if, again, you're looking from a Christian perspective, an absolutely Christian perspective. How do we seek the truths within this when it's maybe not an accurate historical book? Maybe the early Old Testament stuff was more fairy stories passed down, mythologies passed down from, you know, generations of this is how we explain who we are, versus, you know, God hanging out with Moses going, and here's how I created the world. So, again, I have some issues. Overall, better than I expected. A 4 for me is above average. I enjoyed it, and it was worth the read. Recommend this one. The others this month, not so much recommend. This one I would recommend. So that has been my February reading. I did also make some progress in it, and I started Hollowpox, but I am kind of putting Hollowpox to the side for the moment. because I'm in the middle of middle grade March and March Mystery Madness. So whether I finish Hollowpox or not this month, I don't know, but I did make some progress in that, and I made some progress in it. But that's where my reading has been this month. Please let me know if you had thoughts on any of the books I've read, and also what are you reading this month? What has been your best? What has been your worst? Just in general, how's the reading month been going for February? All right, guys, this is Jane. Please like and subscribe, all the usual. Also, I'm a writer, so links to my books below. I write romance, so if you're looking for a new read, please check me out. And my social media is also below if you'd like to connect with me. Thank you. Bye.